So I got some blood drawn earlier this morning because I'm getting surgery next week and they want to run some tests to make sure I'm in tip-top shape for it. I just want to let you all know, so if I appear at all lightheaded throughout this video, you know why that is. What is going on, Solo fam? My name is John Solo, this is Messed Up Origins, and today we're doing something a little different than usual. As you no doubt saw in the title, we're breaking down the origins of Cinderella, a story we talked about back when the series first started. Kinda. I mean, we definitely talked about it, but the reason I say kinda is because that episode wasn't exactly my best work. For starters, what's going on with my collar? How did I not notice that for half the video? But also in that episode, I said Disney's Cinderella was inspired by the Brothers Grimm story, which is just not true. I mean, maybe it had some influence over it, but the movie was mostly adapted from Charles Perrault's rendition. In fact, I straight up overlooked because I did almost no research. I just knew the Grimm brothers story was messed up, so I googled it and based the episode on that. I'll admit I'm a little embarrassed about it and kind of feel like a fraud because the video has over 800,000 views, a like ratio that's almost too good, and the only people calling me out in the comments for being wrong are both really polite and informative. This guy expressed some disappointment in me, and I'll admit I feel some real shame, but I totally deserve it. Now if you want a recap of the Disney movie and an accurate retelling of the Grimm rendition, you can still watch that episode. The story itself is both gruesome and very entertaining. However, if you want to learn the real messed up origins of Cinderella, this is the episode for you. Then if you want to send a message over to solofanmail@gmail.com telling me what you learned, I think that'd be cool, but it's up to you. Link down below if you're interested. And now, Solo fam, we dive headfirst into history. Don't forget to give that like button a gentle pat on the back so it knows it's doing a good job. Subscribe for more content like this in your sub box, and most importantly, enjoy. So as I said earlier, Disney's Cinderella was almost entirely inspired by Charles Perrault's version of the story. As I was reading through it, I was actually surprised at how much overlap there was between the two. From the setup to the finale, they're basically identical. It starts with a widowed guy with a near angelic daughter marrying a total drag of a woman who had two ugly, kind of bitchy daughters. The stepfamily was horrible to the poor girl, making her do all the chores and sleep in the attic on a bale of hay, calling her names like Cinderwench and Cinderella instead of her real name, which we never actually find out. The problem was she could never tell her father about the abuse because he was so whipped, he would scold her for ragging on his drag of a new hag. One day it's announced that the king's son is throwing a ball, and instead of Cinderella getting to go, she has to help her stepsisters get ready for it. She manages to hold a smile throughout the process, but as soon as they leave, she breaks down into tears, and this is when her godmother shows up. Only it's not in the artsy fairy dust way that she does in the movie. Instead, it's more of a, "Hey crying girl, what's wrong?" The rest of the scene unfolds pretty similarly though, even down to the details, with the pumpkin carriage, mice as horses, the beautiful ball gown, and glass slippers. Oh, and speaking of glass slippers, let's talk about those for a sec, because I know people like to joke about how ridiculous the concept of glass slippers actually is. You may not have known this, but in older Cinderella stories, the heroine's slippers were not always glass. In earlier versions, they were made out of velvet, silk, fur, and gold. So why'd Perrault make the change? Well, I don't want to spoil anything, but when Cinderella goes to the ball, she ends up catching the prince's eye and homie falls for her hard. However, when the clock strikes midnight, Cindy's gotta duck out of there fast per orders from her godmother. The first night of the event, she gets away just in time, but the second night, she's in a real rush and loses one of her slippers. When the prince finds it, he announces he'll marry whoever it is and has every woman in the country try it on to no avail. People hear this and like to make jokes saying, "Really? No one in the kingdom has the same size foot?" And that was actually Perrault's thinking too. That, my friends, is why he made it glass. It's not a flexible material, so it had to be molded exactly to the foot, and it's transparent, so the person judging whether or not it fit could be 100% certain that no toes were curled up. Now the question remains, if it was indeed such a perfect fit, why'd it come off her foot in the first place? But when you think about it, that's kind of an obvious answer too. Sweat. She was wearing those things all night, ballroom dancing in them, then tried to run away in them. I'm sure those things were slick, and I'm honestly surprised that she didn't lose both. But back to the story. Eventually, the royal servants make their way to Cinderella's house. Her sisters fail trying to get the slipper on. Then Cinderella volunteers to give it a shot, playing it off like she's joking. Well, the messenger low-key thought she was hotter than her sisters anyway, so he had her try it on. It fit perfectly, and everyone's minds were blown. Then the godmother walks in like the BMF that she is and says, "You think that's crazy? Check this shit out." boom, and transformed Cindy's servant clothes into more fly threads. It was only a few days later that she was married to the prince, and to my disappointment, in this version she actually sets her sisters up with great lords of their own, and everyone lives happily ever after. Now this story was published in French in 1697 under the name Cendrillon ou la Petite Pantoufle de Verre. That was my attempt at a French accent. If you need a garbage can, I got one right here. While Perrault's story was incredibly popular, it was by no means the first version. While some elements like the pumpkin carriage, glass slippers, and fairy godmother being human-like were all original ideas, the overall structure is the same as all the versions that came before it. A girl loses one or both of her parents and ends up in the care of neglectful step-relatives. She attends a grand celebration thanks to a magical guardian's help. The highest-ranking eligible bachelor at that celebration finds her beautiful, but has no idea how to track her down. On the final day of the event, she loses a shoe, and a search begins for the rightful owner. The king or prince eventually finds her, they get married, and she lives happily ever after. The Cinderella story structure might be the most common in the world with over 700 versions found, but when one looks at the details, you'll find some very unique differences. And it's for that reason that we're going even further back to 1634 and checking out our old friend Giambattista Basile's book, The Pentamerone. The Pentamerone, also known as the first collection of fairy tales ever published, contained another story that fit the Cinderella tale type called La Gatta Cenerentola. And I am not exaggerating when I say its setup is the most messed up that I've found. Like usual, the protagonist, Zezolla, is the daughter of a wealthy man whose wife had just died, only this time the first woman he remarries isn't the evil stepmother you'd expect. She's definitely not a great stepmother, but she doesn't fit the antagonistic role is what I mean. Instead, that part belongs to the governess. You see, the governess, which is basically an in-home teacher, had her eyes on Zezolla's dad too, but she knew she would never get a chance without the little girl's help. So listen to this. She convinces the young girl to kill her new stepmom and persuade her father to marry her, saying she'll be a much better mother, as if that's not obvious by her convincing Zezolla to murder someone. Well, believe it or not, Zola does what she says, and when her stepmom is looking through a trunk of old dresses, she drops the trunk's lid right on her neck and snaps her shit up. After the mourning period for a second wife is over, Zola convinces her father to give her governess a chance, and before long, they end up married. But there's an M. Night Shyamalan level twist coming up. This bitch had 6 kids that she didn't tell anyone about. As soon as they move into Zola's, they take priority over her in every way possible, and apparently the father is so simple-minded, he forgets he has his own daughter to care for too. Life ends up sucking for the poor girl in all the ways we're familiar with, and they change her name from Zezolla to La Gatta Cenerentola, which means the hearth cat. Appropriate because they made her sleep in the fireplace. You know, giving her the worst chores, a crappy bedroom, and taking away her bed is all pretty terrible, but changing her name like that seems like an oddly personal slight, especially since they conspired to commit murder together. They're supposed to be partners in crime. What's wrong with this? Well, the poor girl's struggles don't last for long. See, on her father's 3rd wedding day, she was visited by a little white dove that said, "Whenever you need anything, send the request to the Dove of the Fairies in the island of Sardinia, and you will instantly have what you wish." Well, it just so happened that her father was traveling to Sardinia on business soon, so she told him to relay the message. When he returned, he had gifts from the fairies: a date tree, a golden bucket, a silk napkin, and a hoe. I mean the gardening tool. Get your mind out of the gutter. Zola is overjoyed at receiving these gifts and cares for her new tree like it's her very own baby Groot. In just a few days, it grows as tall as a woman. A fairy emerges from it and asks the girl what she wishes for. The girl responds that she wants to be able to leave the house without being recognized by her family, and the fairy says, "Can do." As for the rest of the story, you can pretty much fill in the blanks from here. Basile really stretched out the last bit, making the ball last 3 full days and the search for Zezolla last another 2, but in the end, the king finds her and they live happily ever after. And because I know you're wondering, no, the step family didn't get what was coming to them this time either, and I'm very disappointed. In this version, when the prince's servant brought the slipper near Zezolla, it actually jumped to her foot of its own fruition. Then her sister snuck away to their mother to complain about how the prince has such bad taste, and that's the end of the story. A pretty lackluster ending if you ask me, but at least it started on a high note, what with the Cinderella character being a cold-blooded killer and all. But our journey does not stop here, Solo fam. There's one more Cinderella story I want us to discuss before you go, and it's the oldest one we've ever discovered. Like most of the fairy tales we cover, we have no idea how far back in time this one actually goes. But the oldest version of the story we found was published around the year 850 by the Chinese poet Duan Chengxi. My apologies for any mispronunciation, as you could probably tell just by looking at me, I'm an uncultured swine.
You uncultured swine!
As always, the setup in this story is the same, but just a little different. Instead of the protagonist, Ye Shen, being in a royal family or a wealthy one, she's the daughter of the chief of a cave-dwelling tribe of people. In this version, the fairy godmother godmother is actually a fairy god fish that's very chatty and regularly talks to Ye Shen to help her get through her rough home life. However, when her evil stepmom and stepsister Junli find out about the fish, they stab it, kill it, and eat it. I heard that's how they were gonna kill off the fairy godmother in the movie too, but Walt was being a pansy about it. Ye Shen was devastated about the loss of her only friend, but one night she was visited by the spirit of her ancestor, I'm assuming her mom, who told her that by burying the fish's bones in the four corners of her room, she could harness its powers and wish for anything she wants. Fast forward to when the new year comes around and there's a massive festival to celebrate. Thanks to her dead fish friend, Ye Shen gets to sneak off to the celebration and be like everybody else for once. What's interesting about this story is she doesn't meet her royal suitor directly or have to be home by a certain time. Instead, she only bounces from the party because she's worried her mom and sister recognize her and loses a shoe in the process. Then it's through a series of trades that her golden slipper winds up in the hands of a merchant. He then sells it to the young king, who's intrigued by its small size. As I'm sure many of you know, back in the day, having small feet was considered beautiful in Chinese culture. I'm sure one of you can let me know in the comments if that's still the case. This beauty standard led to a horrible process called foot binding, where young girls' feet were wrapped up tightly to warp their shape. If that didn't mortify you enough, the ideal size for a bound foot was only 4 inches in Western measurement. That's like that big. A whole inch bigger than my foot. So the king sends out a search party to find the shoe's owner, but with no luck. See, in this version, the shoe was magic and would shrink to be too small for anyone but Ye Shen. He then has a pavilion built and puts the shoe on display in front of his palace. Ye Shen manages to travel there, intending to take the shoe back home, but the guard sees her for being a thief. She's then brought in front of the king to explain herself, and he takes pity on her life story. He allows her to go home and even lets her take the shoe. The next day, though, he visits her at her house and invites her to come live in his kingdom, away from the cave-dwelling savages. Then she puts on the golden slippers, is suddenly adorned in some sick fits, the king proposes to her, and she says yes. As for the fate of her stepmom and sister, I think you'll really enjoy this. Since her sister Junli had basically lost all hope of marrying rich, her mom tried to make her the new slave, but her daughter wasn't going to stand for it. The two get in an argument that escalates and results in a cave-in, killing both of them in what would later be called the Tomb of Regretful Women. Isn't that just oddly satisfying after being denied the joy of revenge in the past 2 stories? I know, you should wish your enemies well, but these aren't my enemies. They're just assholes, so whatever. Anyway, Solo fam, I hope you enjoyed those stories because, frankly, if you didn't, I wasted a lot of time. We just went from the version that inspired the movie, to the oldest version found in Europe, to the oldest version found ever. But guess what? Since you stayed past the part where I sounded like I was gonna wrap this up, you get a bonus story because I like you more. The story of Ye Shen is indeed the oldest version of the Cinderella tale type we've found. In the Arne-Thompson Index, that falls under type 510A, the prosecuted heroine. But there's another fable of ancient Greek origin that also involves a missing slipper called the Rhodopis. It was first recorded sometime between 50 BCE and 50 AD and is considered by some to be the real first Cinderella story, even though it's missing many other elements. One day, a beautiful servant girl is bathing in the Nile River when an eagle snatches one of her sandals and drops it in the king of Egypt's lap. The king is suddenly intrigued by the rather aesthetic sandal and the strangeness of the occurrence and sends his men all over the country to find its owner. The servant girl is eventually brought to him and they get married. That's pretty much the whole story. It obviously doesn't follow the typical Cinderella structure, which is why I didn't include it in the main portion of this episode, but I knew if I didn't include it at all, I'd once again feel like a fraud. And the last thing I need to do is make a second video amending a mistake, am I right? Anyway, this time, that really is the end of the episode. Thank you all so much for watching and sticking around until this point. You know how the rest of this goes though. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications for your subscription, share this video with someone who you think might enjoy it. If you want to follow me on social media, the handles are right here and links are down below. Follow me or don't. I won't be offended if you don't, but my heart will be broken into 1,000 pieces, so until next time though, Solo fam, my name is John Solo, and remember, John shot first.